Hey everyone, welcome to the launch call for Leadnow's federal election campaign. We're going to be giving everyone a minute or two to arrive, and then we'll get started. But as we wait for folks to join, I'm just going to invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. So our chat moderator, Blair, is going to put a prompt in there, but feel free to share your name and your pronouns, and where you're calling in from, and one reason you showed up today. And we'll just give folks a minute to share in the chat. All right. So welcome everyone. Welcome to How We Fight Back, the launch call for Leadnow's federal election campaign. So happy to be here with you all. And for anyone who can't see the screen, we're looking at a slide that says How We Fight Back, set against a picture of Leadnow volunteers. So there's a lot that we're going to be covering today, but first things first, we start all of our events at Leadnow with a dedication. So today I want to dedicate this time to anyone whose identity is being scapegoated by the right for political gain, both here and south of the border. I'm thinking specifically about immigrants, people with precarious status, queer and trans people, and people of color. We all have a lot of stake in this specific political moment and as we head toward an election. But for some folks, those stakes are particularly acute and personal right now. So I want to dedicate this call to them. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the territories that we're all calling in from today. I'm personally joining from the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And as the political discourse turns increasingly nationalist in response to Trump's annexation threats, something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how my identities as a Canadian and as a settler are largely defined by my responsibilities to my neighbors and to my communities, and especially to the Indigenous nations on whose lands I live. And I think that that's really important because the right here has already begun to tell a story about how a strong Canada is one that puts Canadians first at the exclusion of others. But I actually think that there's something, if there's anything that can make Canada strong, it's all of us embodying this deep sense of responsibility to one another, even and especially across lines of difference. And that's really at the heart of a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you're not sure whose territories you live in, you can go to native-land.ca. I think Blair is going to put a link in the chat. And you can put in where you live, and it will give you a bit of information about whose territories you live on, and any treaties that might exist there, which is a great starting point to start thinking about those responsibilities that you have to Indigenous communities in these places. My name is Kate. I work at Leadnow. I'm going to be presenting for today's call along with Peter Rose Gibbs, who's our organizing manager. And we're helped out by Blair and Linda Ruth and Maggie, who are going to be on tech and supporting in the chat. So before we get into it, I'd like to hear from folks one more time in the chat. And I'd love to hear what's one thing, even if there's many, that's worrying you about the world that we live in right now?
Kate, I just want to quickly just note, I'm getting a lot of direct messages, and I think some people might have message only to hosts on. So just note that if you want everyone in the call to be able to hear you in the Zoom chat, there's a little blue box, and you can make sure it selects everyone in meeting. Because right now, a lot of people are direct messaging me their personal fears, which is both touching and leaves a lot of people out.
Thanks, Peter. Super helpful. Yeah, I'm seeing a ton come in the chat. I'm seeing a lot about the rise of the far right, about the climate crisis, about affordability. It's like almost too much to process. But I think what's clear from all of these responses is that we're coming together today in the midst of a really massive political reckoning, both here and south of the border. And it's clear from everything that's coming in the chat that the stakes of this election are really high and really personal to each of us. And that's why it matters so much that all of us made the decision to be here today, because I really believe that the best and the only thing we can do in the face of the many crises we're up against, whether we're talking about an empowered far right or an affordability crisis or an intensifying climate crisis or a trade war, is to refuse to be overwhelmed and refuse to give up and to refuse to stop fighting for the version of Canada that we want to live in. So we're looking at a slide now that reads agenda with context, strategy, and how you fit in columns. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Together, we're going to take a look at the veritable shitstorm that's brewing in Canadian politics. We're going to make sense of how we got here, and we're going to give you the keys to fight the right and raise the bar on what we expect from our politics and build the people power we'll need now and beyond the election to realize that vision for Canada. And some quick Zoom housekeeping before we get started. If you're comfortable, we invite you to turn your camera on. And just to note that we have turned off everyone's mics during the presentation to avoid distraction, but you're super welcome to use the chat to ask questions and keep the conversation going. And our chat moderators, Maggie and Blair, are here to help and to answer any questions. We also have a Slido feature enabled. So if you have a specific question that you'd like us to answer during the call, you can ask it there and we'll try to reserve a couple minutes for Q&A. And that's just because otherwise it's really hard to keep track of questions that are coming in the chat. Closed captioning is also available, and the call is being recorded, but only our slides and the presenters will be visible, not the chat, and not your faces. So now I'm going to pass it off to Leadnow's Executive Director, Shanaz Gokul, who is going to be orienting us to the moment that we're in.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you to all of you for joining us here today. Really pleased to be in good company and in good community with all of you. So the first slide that we're looking at here reads, and I think that Kate, you want to switch over to our first slide, please. It reads the crisis with several headlines and images related to the Trump tariff threat, the Jasper wildfires, and the spike in food bank demand. We all believe that no matter where we come from, how long we've been here, or how much money we make, we should be able to put good food on the table and afford a good place to call home. But right now, that's not our reality. As we're all intimately aware, the cost of living has skyrocketed over the past few years, as have rent and the cost of housing in general. I'm really curious to hear from folks in the chat. What's one way inflation and the rising cost of living have impacted you? If you're comfortable, please share that in the chat with all of us. More and more of us are struggling to afford basic things like groceries, medication, or a decent apartment. And whole generations of young people have given up on the dream of ever owning a home. Thousands of people, seniors and persons with disabilities, have been left behind. The climate crisis is costing us in the form of skyrocketing insurance rates, public money sunk into fossil fuel subsidies and failing pipelines, and enormous relief efforts in the wake of climate disasters like the Jasper wildfire. Throughout all of this, our wages have stayed the same and stagnated. On top of everything else, Trump's tariff threats are sowing real fear and uncertainty about Canada's economic future, leaving many of us worried about job losses, rising prices, and small business closures that would make it even harder to make ends meet for too many people and communities across the country. Maggie, I think you've been taking a look at what people are saying in the chat. Can you please share with us some of the comments that we're hearing from folks?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one thing that's interesting is with the introductions, we saw like people are calling from coast to coast to coast today. But in the answers to this question, I think we're seeing a lot of themes, like lots of people talking about feeling uncertain about being able to save money for the future and concerned about being able to pay rent and the bill and their bills, and worrying about like our communities and our neighbors. And one thing that I wanted to pick out actually in particular is Joanne. I think you said one thing that it's doing is also it forces us to focus on like the grind and like the need to survive versus like yeah, making it like harder for us to organize and be in community with others. And I think that's really, really true and points to the importance in these moments of us to turn to each other and build community um, towards like the world that we really, really want to live in.
Thanks, Maggie, and thank you for to all of you who've shared what you're feeling. I mean, I think that another way to sum things up, whether it's the grind or just being able to afford basic necessities that we need to be able to live our lives with dignity and security, is we're all getting a crap deal here. So the next slide we're looking at is a slide with pictures of CEOs and headlines about corporate greed. Because where there are losers, there are also winners. And those winners today are a handful of exceedingly wealthy, well-connected individuals on Bay Street. They're people like Galen Weston Jr., the heir to the Loblaws dynasty, who famously docked his workers hero pay during the pandemic, got caught in a bread price fixing scandal, and whose company is in the news right now for overcharging customers on meat products, all despite having a personal net worth of $18 billion. The people like Rich Kruger, the Suncor CEO, who earned $36.8 million last year, while thousands of people lost everything in the Jasper wildfire. For decades, people like Galen Weston and Rich Kruger have gotten rich at our expense. And while economic forces of inflation are partly to blame for the crunch we're now feeling, they've been eating away at the foundations of Canada's social systems for years. Inflation has just put pressure on an already splintering system, and people in Canada are paying the price. The next slide that we're looking at has pictures of Pierre Poilievre, Justin Trudeau, and headlines about Conservatives' polling leads and plans to cut public service. When things get bad, like they are right now, people start to look for change. And after 9 years of Liberal leadership, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is taking full advantage of the public mood to present the Conservatives as the party that can deliver that change on issues like affordability and housing, using his signature and likely now defunct Axe the Tax campaign to carry the message while also weaving in really dangerous culture war dog whistles against immigrants and queer folks, trans people to appeal to his growing far right base. So another question I'd love for you to share in the chat if you're comfortable. How have you been hearing your families, friends, neighbors, people in your community talk about this election and Pierre Poilievre? If you're comfortable, please share that in the chat. I don't need to tell all of you, you're all on our email lists, that Pierre Poilievre's Working Class Act is a sham. And it bears repeating that this is a career politician who earned a full pension at the age of 31 and who spent his entire career cozying up to the exact corporate elites who got us into this mess in the first place, including figures like Elon Musk. As a verified Donald Trump fanboy, he's proved himself, especially over the last couple of months, unwilling or unable to show any amount of backbone in response to Trump's bullying and threats. And if he wins the next election, he's made no secret of his plans to slash social services, steal our pensions, gut Canada's climate policies, and roll out the red carpet for the rich and powerful. Maggie, I think we might have had some comments coming in that people were sharing. Can you share what folks are saying about the kinds of conversations that they're having about Pierre Poilievre in this election?
Yeah, so there's a pretty big mixed bag. I would say, like, on one spectrum, it sounds like some folks, your communities, your neighbors, people you're talking to are feeling pretty apathetic and scared. a bit worried about the outcome of the election, feeling that it feels pretty certain that Pierre Poilievre is going to be our next prime minister. On the other hand, it also sounds like there's a couple of folks who are really distrustful, really not buying his shtick, and really, really concerned about what we can do to prevent him from getting more power.
Thanks so much, Maggie, and thanks for that summary and for all of you, because you know you're in good community and good company when we're all are feeling and reflecting some of the same fears and concerns that we've had. So, you know, as we've heard from all of you, no matter how insincere it might be, Poilievre's strategy of outrage, division, and diversion has largely worked. And for the last year, the Conservatives have been steadily leading in the polls and routinely breaking their own fundraising targets. However, Trudeau's resignation, the Liberal leadership race, and Trump's tariff threats, the picture has changed. And the latest polls are showing a much tighter contest between the Conservatives and Liberals than what we've previously seen over the past year and a half. But the facts remain that the polls are fickle, and this election is still playing out on Poilievre's turf. So our work is cut out for us, all of us, to put him and the far right on the back foot. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Kate, and she's going to roll out how we're going to do that.
Thanks so much for that really helpful context setting, Shanaz. So yes, things are really bleak. And so I figured we owed ourselves a brief palate cleanser. So this is my friend Rachel's duck. And these are some of the other pets in the Leadnow community. We got some dogs with ducks, we got some cats. Take a second, enjoy knowing that none of these guys have ever heard of Pierre Poilievre. And now we're going to jump into how we can go about meeting this moment and rising to the challenge. So like Shanaz said, and as I'm seeing reflected in the chat, things are pretty bleak right now, but also nothing about this election is set in stone. And we've already seen how Trudeau's resignation and Mark Carney's rising star and Trump's tariff threat have really hurt the Conservatives standing in the polls. And we know that there's a lot that can happen between now and election day to put Poilievre on the defensive. So what that means for us is that we need to build the people power necessary to pounce in moments like these when the winds shift our way, and to keep up the fight no matter who wins on election night. So how do we do that? So first things first, it might seem a little bit counterintuitive. This is a slide that reads, raise the bar for progressives with some text that I'll speak to. So it might seem a little counterintuitive, but in the face of a far-right populism, our response actually needs to be to double down on our vision for Canada's future, one in which every person in Canada has a safe, affordable place to call home, where we've taken the climate crisis seriously and built a self-reliant, job-rich, clean energy economy and brought Canada's billionaire class to heel. And I'd love to hear from folks in the chat. Setting aside the fear of what we stand to lose under a Poilievre government, what's in your vision for Canada's future? And what are some of those things that you hope for yourself and for your family and for your friends and community? And while you're writing in the chat, I'll continue to say sticking to our guns is so critical, because what often happens when a far-right leader begins to gain traction is that progressive parties shift to the center to try to hold on to their voting base. But it's a losing strategy, because what voters are really looking for and finding in someone like Poilievre isn't a specific policy position, but it's recognition that the system isn't working for people like us. And it's why someone like Bernie Sanders was able to make so much headway with potential Trump voters during the 2016 US election, just by acknowledging that fact. And it's also why the Liberals' affordability half measures, like the GST holiday, weren't enough to turn their fortunes in the polls. So what that means for us is that instead of getting out the vote for any Liberal or NDP or Green candidate just because they're better than the alternative, we need to raise the bar instead on what we expect from progressive parties and politicians. And Maggie, I'm curious to hear what are some of the themes that you're seeing emerging in the chat about what that vision for Canada looks like.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely some very like specific things that people are talking about. So for example, housing for all, strong education and healthcare and public services, climate action, a transition to a green economy, but also like some people talked about um, a feeling of being closer with each other, like building stronger relationships and stronger communities, and feeling a bit of like hope and stability for our futures, which I think is really, really important. Those two things side by side, both like the tangible things we deserve, but also like, yeah, the feelings of belonging and community and relationships that we also want to build alongside that.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, and I just want to say all of these things are possible. They're not out of the realm of possibility. These are things that governments can help us achieve. So before the election is called, we think it's our responsibility to make sure that parties understand that they only stand a shot at winning if they trash their old rule book and really start championing that vision of a fair and just and connected Canada. And just to be realistic about it, we know that not all progressives are the same, and we know that not all of them will choose the courageous path. But once the election is called, we're planning to go all out to elect candidates who aren't afraid to take that stand for working people, and most importantly, who stand a chance at beating conservative challengers in competitive races. And that really matters because even a handful of politicians can help to shift the political weather. And one of the clearest examples of this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Squad in the US, which, with the backing of a powerful climate movement, popularized the idea of a Green New Deal, which was a bold and populist policy agenda while Donald Trump was still serving his first term in the White House. So in helping these people get elected and in showing their parties that leading with a bold progressive vision is a winning strategy, we can stop playing on Poilievre's turf and we can raise the bar on the issues that matter. And not to mention, those bold people-centered policies are exactly what will make Canada strong in the face of Trump's tariff threat, not randomly putting troops at Canada's border or in the Arctic. So this next slide reads, expose the conservative agenda, with some text that I'll speak to. So the next thing we need to do is we need to hit the conservatives where they're weakest, and that is their public image and their reputation. As Shanaz pointed out earlier, there's a complete disconnect, really, between who and what the conservatives say they care about and what they plan to do if they form government. And that's reflected in the polling because when prospective voters are asked why they like the Conservatives, their answers are almost always about, a sense that Pierre Poilievre gets it, and they reflect a desire for change from the status quo. But there's almost nothing in there about the Conservatives' actual policy positions. And that is a really critical opportunity for us because we can make it clear to prospective voters that the change that Pierre Poilievre promises wouldn't be for them. And the Conservatives' failure to take a stand against Trump's tariff threat really has made them vulnerable to that line of critique because we can double down on that message that Pierre Poilievre is a dangerous phony who would make life harder for people like us. And as an added bonus, in the case that the Conservatives do win in the next election, the more people who distrust them at the outset, the easier it will be to organize our communities to fight back when they come for our social services or our rights or those of our neighbors. This next slide reads, build the people power we need for the long haul, with some text that I'll speak to. And finally, we know that the forces we're up against won't be overturned in one election cycle, but if we want to break the chokehold of corporate influence on our politics and keep Poilievre's conservatives from dragging us backward, we'll need real people power on our side, and we need to start building it today. So over the next 3 months, we're going to build the momentum we need to make a difference in this election, and then we're going to prepare ourselves to keep right on fighting no matter who wins on election night. So there's a lot of work to do. But the only thing that will beat organized money is organized people. So I'm going to pass it to Peter, who's the organizing manager at Leadnow, and they're going to be sharing a little bit about how they came to understand that this was an election that they couldn't sit out. Peter, I'll pass to you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm actually gonna tell you a bit of a personal story. And it starts with this picture here. This slide has a picture of me with my best friend from kindergarten, Kareen, and I'm wearing a bow tie and rainbow suspenders. And when I was 5 years old and in kindergarten, the boys in my class used to play this game at recess where they would chase the girls and try and kiss them. And I thought that this was really wrong and unfair. And so I would chase after them and I would sort of block them and push them aside and stop the boys from playing this game. Fast forward 25 years, and I'm 29 years old, and I'm standing up in the viewing gallery in the BC legislature, and I'm shouting and interrupting the Premier of BC while she's introducing a bill. This slide has a headline from the Tyee that says, LNG health firings climate crisis. Who said summer governance was relaxed? And it's a story about how chaotic that day in the legislature was. The reason that I was shouting in the legislature was because the Premier of BC at the time, Christy Clark, had called an emergency summer sitting of the legislature to pass a multi-billion-dollar tax break to convince a multinational fossil fuel company to pass a bill, to build an LNG plant that had received unanimous Indigenous opposition and rejection. And it didn't really seem, it wasn't really clear what chance we had of stopping it, but it just felt really wrong and unfair. And like, I needed to do something about it. And so I recruited a friend of mine to help plan a direct action, and we recruited 8 other friends. And we snuck we snuck a bunch of signs and protest materials in through security, and we staged a protest in the middle of the MLAs sitting and introducing this bill. Now, it's 9 years later, and I walk in my front door, and a magazine I've subscribed to has come. This is a picture of the magazine The Walrus, and on it is a picture, on the cover is a picture of Pierre Poilievre striding confidently across a room, and the headline just reads, "If he wins," in all caps. And I looked at this magazine briefly, and then I turned it over, and I hid it under a stack of books, and I didn't look at it for several weeks, months actually. And it was one of the first times in my life that I can remember something feeling wrong and unfair. And instead of feeling anger or urgency, I just felt scared. And just to be clear, I don't actually think Pierre Poilievre is a particularly scary person. I think he's mostly a ridiculous person in terms of how he behaves. But the things that he stands for were really immobilizing for me. And I just couldn't actually bring myself to open the pages and read sort of like line for line what policies the far right would bring if they came to government in Canada. Next slide, please, Kate. This slide has a series of screen captures of headlines about what the Conservatives would do to housing, immigration, immigrants, queer and trans people, and climate action. And so, yeah, I think for me, it's like a scary time for me personally to be like a trans person and like a parent. I have a 2-year-old and thinking about their future. It's a scary time for me to be a renter, seeing what the housing market's doing. And I know that for everyone else who has other identities, it's scary for people of color. It's scary for people who don't have Canadian citizenship. It's scary for people with disabilities. And I know that from what we've talked about already in this call, that all of us here are really concerned about what this government would do, and that we all have a vision for our society of things that we do want, where we all have our needs met, where people are treated with respect, and people are able to have, feel cared for and respected in their community. And I did eventually read the magazine, and it wasn't just knowing that there were other people who cared about the same things as me that let me do it, that got me there. It was actually when we started recruiting volunteers in the fall for it was actually the first group of volunteers that will wind up helping run the election campaign. And some of them are actually helping with this call tonight. And it was when we started to recruit those folks is that I went from feeling not sure what to do to being really confident of what we're supposed to be doing together. And I think that over the past few years, progressives have just been really unprepared to take on a government like this. But I actually think that what we're doing right now, coming together and getting organized to take action, is the antidote, is the thing we need to do. And this next slide has, I think, like the sum of the thing that is keeping me going, which is that the antidote to far-right populism is a credible progressive alternative. And that what we want to do today is really share how you can be part of building that credible progressive alternative. And so the next slide is a slide introducing our Raise the Bar campaign. It's 2 bits of text that says, 3 bits of text that says raise the bar, and the is in the middle, is in a big line that one might interpret as a bar. And so as part of our Raise the Bar campaign, the sort of foundation of it is going to be a program that we're introducing today called Election Squads. And this slide just says Election Squads on it. And so the Election Squads are going to be powered by groups of people from the same neighborhood, town, or city anywhere in the country. They'll work together from now until election day, which, given current political winds, is probably 3 or 4 months, to expose the conservatives' real agenda, elect progressive champions, and organize our communities to take action with us. Squads will meet and take action weekly and follow a step-by-step program with the support of other squads, volunteer leaders, and Leadnow staff. And all you need to do to start one is have 2 committed people and a toolkit that we can give to you at the end of this call. Next slide, please. The responsibilities of what election squads are going to be working on are in 3 main buckets. Okay, I'm not seeing the next slide. I'm not sure if other people are. Sorry, folks. I think I've lost slides. Has anyone else lost slides?
Yes, my internet died. Give me 1 second.
Oh, the perils of working remotely.
Oh, technology. We love it.
If you're watching the recording, you can pause and skip forward 30 seconds. And if you're
Right.
not watching the recording, you can think back to those chickens earlier. Okay,
And here's the slide back. Great. Thanks, Kate.
perfect. So the election squad responsibilities will be to vet and endorse champion candidates and help them defeat conservatives in tight races. So once the election is called, election squads that are in proximity to key ridings will vet progressive candidates, and specifically will be asking for a real commitment to leadership on climate action, affordable housing, and corporate profiteering. If the candidates meet our bar, squads will work with them to get elected by hosting sign waving and flyering actions, as well as helping get out the word and get out the vote for the endorsed candidates. Number 2, election squads will help expose the conservatives' real agenda. From now until election day, election squads will be everywhere, hammering away at the conservatives' reputation. They'll plaster their communities with stickers, flyers, posters, alongside sort of memes and social media posts where appropriate. And then lastly, as all this is happening, we'll be building capacity to get ready for the day after. Because no matter who wins the next election, we'll need to be ready and organized to bring the fight for affordable housing, real climate action, and corporate accountability. During the election period, election squads will grow our people power by hosting town halls, house meetings, and other events designed to bring in our communities together and equip them to take action. And so this next slide has the timeline of the election campaign with some text that I'll speak to. And so here's the high level of what it's going to look like. Right now, February 13th, we're hosting our Raise the Bar launch call. Over the next week or two, election squads will launch their team and then start getting ready for either house meetings or town halls that they'll host in the middle of March. And then in April, we're expecting is around when we're expecting an election call, although it could be earlier or later. And throughout April and May, we'll vet, endorse, and elect progressive champions, and then work to expose the conservatives' agenda in our communities. And so that's the like high level plan. But I want to pass it over to Kate now, who can talk about how you personally can plug in.
Thanks so much, Peter. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that story. And I think it speaks to something that so many of us have been feeling, which is the need to do something about the rise of the far right and the many forces that feel like they're against us. And then also how difficult it can be to combat that overwhelm and to figure out what to do in a moment like this. So I think that sentiment that Peter shared of fighting through the overwhelm and then deciding to do something about it anyway is something that I've definitely been taking inspiration from. And it might be something that resonates with you too. It's a scary thing to take a first step and to join a team with people you don't know. But if you're feeling that same way, if you're feeling the urgency of the threat of a poly-ever government and just like something in you that's compelling you to want to take action to stop it, yeah, this call is for you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drop a link in the chat. And this is the sign up link to join an election squad in your area. So our goal is to get the numbers we need to launch at least 8 election squads all across the country on this call. I want to see if we can hit that target. And if you are ready to go, if you're ready to take action, I'm just going to invite you to open that link in the chat and to sign up to join an election squad right now. And while you're doing that, while you're filling out that form, I'm going to pass the mic to Leadnow volunteer Blair, who hosted their first event with Leadnow last year as part of an RBC Day of Action. And they're going to share a little bit about what that experience was like of stepping up for the first time. So Blair, I'll pass it to you.
Hey everyone. I first joined Leadnow in April of 2024 for Fossil Fuels Day. I wanted to attend my first protest ever, but I hadn't had the opportunity, known the right people. It just never seemed to come my way. So I decided to make it happen for myself. I looked at the map to see if there were any events planned near me, and I checked for a couple of days, but nothing near me popped up. I was getting a little worried that once again it just wasn't going to happen. I talked to a few people running fossil fuels, and I was asked if I was going to be starting a campaign in my area, and I just wasn't sure. I had never been to a protest. I was and still am disabled and in a wheelchair with chronic pain and chronic conditions, and I just wasn't sure that I would be able to pull off something on my own and actually have people show up because none of my friends actually lived anywhere near me. I was determined that I would be joining in on this, though, and I finally clicked that daunting button to start on the protest in Regina, Saskatchewan. I was nervous. I mean, I had heard pretty scary things on the news about protests coming from the US, and I was afraid someone would tip me out of my wheelchair or something, or make fun of me for wearing a mask after the pandemic had supposedly ended. I decided that I was going to do it anyway because I was ready to join the fight and be on the right side of history. So I made pamphlets to hand out to people that were jam-packed with information on the bank, genocide, fossil fuels, the Wet'suwet'en protecting their land from a pipeline the bank was supporting, and I made flyers to post all over the town, the next town over, and the city. I went online and found organizations that were willing to post my information about the protest, and I posted on my own social media pages too. I bought a clipboard, made a spreadsheet for people's names and their emails so I could contact them about other events in the future, got my pamphlets printed at Staples, and I made some signs to hold up. The day came around and I had all the signs of a pending panic attack. We got there and we were the only ones. Then slowly but surely people started to trickle in. We even had a kid come and draw some pictures on the sidewalk, and their parent wrote some important information too. The people that came were friendly, supportive, and ready for a good verbal battle with anyone that tried to tear us down, and there were only 2 people that really tried our patience. The security guard came out and looked around, nodded, and went back inside. Most people were happy to receive the information, and some were quite angry with the bank and refused to go in when that was why they came in the first place. No one tried to touch us, though two men did try to test us, but our resident scientist blew them out of the water every time. It went swimmingly well. After the anxiety was gone and I was filled with this burning in my belly, a joy and resistance resonated through me, and I was excited for the next time that I got to do this. The folks who showed up had fun, they felt like they were a part of something good, they gained some knowledge, set a good example, and they were appreciative that they had the opportunity. I was ecstatic. My companion, who had come with me, was also filled with this joy and urge to resist the systems in place. The staff at Leadnow were extremely supportive through the entire process. If I had a question, they were a quick email or Zoom call away. I did it, and you can too.
Blair, thank you so much for sharing. And if folks want to drop some appreciation for Blair in the chat, I think it would be super appreciated. So I just want to say, if you're on the fence about joining an election squad, and the thing that's holding you back is some nervousness, likely everyone else who's here on this call is feeling the same thing. And I think our power just comes when we take that leap and do the scary thing, and then find that courage through connection. So I'm looking at the sign up sheet right now. It looks like we are already at 80 signups to join election squads all across the country, which is so amazing. Please feel free to keep it up if you haven't had a chance to fill out the sign up form, or if you're having trouble accessing it. And if you didn't sign up to join an election squad, but are looking for some other ways that you can stay involved, we're gonna drop a second link. And that's a sign up to be a Raise the Bar action taker, which will keep in our, which means that we'll keep you in the loop on opportunities to take action, either in person or online, in the lead up to election day. So if you're not ready to join a team just yet, but you do want to stay in the loop, you can click that link and fill in your details. So if you have just signed up to join an election squad, what we're going to be doing in just a minute is we're going to be opening up breakout rooms, one for each region where we have signups. And when the rooms open, we're going to ask you to join yours, and we're going to ask you to take about 10 minutes to do the following. So we're going to ask you to introduce yourselves with your name and your pronouns. We're going to ask you to choose someone to be the host, and this is the person who will be responsible for getting you to your first meeting, so scheduling and facilitating that first team meeting. And if you're the host, we're going to send you a link to book an activation call, and that's how you'll get connected to a volunteer leader or a Leadnow staff who will make sure you have what you need to get your to help get your team started. In your breakout, we're also going to ask you to decide a time for your first meeting, anytime between February 19th and 23rd. It's coming up fast, but we just want to make sure that we're capturing all of the momentum coming out of this call, because this election is coming up fast. And then we're also going to ask you to decide if your team would like to coordinate via Discord, which is our strong preference. It's the communication platform that Leadnow uses for a lot of our volunteers, or email. And if Discord, we're going to have you, if you have time in your breakout, open that link to join Discord together. So Blair should have dropped a link in the chat to the election squad worksheet. This is where you'll take notes and record your responses to those prompts. And if you didn't sign up to join an election squad, we're going to be wrapping up the call after we come back. So if you're not planning on going into a breakout, we'll say goodbye to you for now, and thank you so much for being here, and look forward to seeing you again as our campaign grows over the coming months. So Linda Ruth, how are we doing on our breakout rooms?
We're ready to go. I see that Sarah has raised a hand. I don't know, Kate, if you want to do that now or do it after the breakout rooms.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll open up the breakout rooms if they're ready to go. If anyone has a lingering question, you can stick around and ask it. But yeah, we're gonna open up the breakout rooms. Click on the breakout room for your region. If there's no one else in there with you, there should be a breakout room for
Solo squad. Solo squad.
Yeah, folks who
Yes.
are alone in their area for now. And we will come back in about 10 minutes.
Great. All right, here we go.